Great, thank you. That was really interesting, actually, to listen to what's happening at Sheffield Hallam, because I think there's a lot of scope for MOOCs to do much more than we think they're doing, and I think you've demonstrated by using different tools and things you wouldn't necessarily do. So I think it's quite interesting. So yes, after the hype has gone. So hello everyone. I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you today about some thoughts and some of the research that we've been doing about MOOCs. And when I say we, I mean people that have the MOOC sphere means people, anyone can take part in it. So the research really is coming through from Alt MOOC SIG, which is the special interest group we have within the Alt community, the Association for Learning Technology. And we've been watching MOOCs for quite a while. But as you all know, when we first started looking at MOOCs, it's probably about 2012, 2013, and it was really very much MOOC hysteria. So at the time, when everyone was hearing, oh, this new word, what's a MOOC? Everyone's a little sick of hearing about MOOCs. One of the things that I was particularly interested in, I was doing a dissertation with Edinburgh University. I was doing their digital education masters, and I said to my boss, what shall I do my dissertation on? And he said, do it on MOOCs, but I can't tell you why. So immediately my interest was raised, but he wasn't allowed to say anything because Southampton was about to be part of the consortium for Futurelearn. But what he wanted me to do was start looking at MOOCs and seeing what was actually happening in the United States. And that's what I did. So that's where my interest came from. And in particular, I noticed that there wasn't really much proper research. The only research came from the MOOCs, not as we know them now, but more of the MOOCs, which is the MOOCs which are much more constructivist, or working together, not using a particular platform, so not in the image of the universities to which we've then transferred this model. So yeah, there was lots of hysteria though. Lots of people were saying that then MOOCs were going to take away their jobs. Things were going to be no longer, universities were going to end. There was the campus tsunami was one of the things that the New York Times said. So there was a lot of hype, and really I think what this is, I'm hoping to talk to you about, my ideas are really that it hasn't really happened that way, and it hasn't been as scary as we all thought. I have got a question for you all though, and you can answer in the chat and we can look at it later, but when you hear the word MOOC now, what do you really think of? So what is it that you think that you associate MOOCs with? That's something that I'm interested in hearing from all of you, really. Very happy to have a chat about that as we go along. But yeah, so back then, 2012, lots of hype and lots of people writing about their own personal experiences through blogs. So what I was doing, I created something in a Scoop.it. So you might not have heard of Scoop.it. It's scoop.it is the website address. And I gathered everything I could ever find that was relevant and useful and really not just someone's personal opinion about MOOCs. So I kept that up. So for the last 3 years, I've been putting information into this Scoop.it, and you're very welcome to have a look at it. It's just a useful, almost like a timeline of what's been happening. However, let's have a look at what we were thinking about. So I did a sentiment analysis in 2013 to see what the people's thoughts were. This is just a snapshot of that sentiment analysis. This one came from Katie Jordan. So Katie Jordan has done lots and lots of research all about the MOOC literature. She's been looking at all the data. It's really an interesting person to find out. Just Google Katie Jordan MOOC, then you'll have lots of information. At the time, in 2013, it was fairly positive. A couple of dips into the negative, which is the pink area, but that was the usual, it's going to take our jobs away. But everything else was like, this is amazing, this is great, we can take it on. And particularly in America. In America, everyone was thinking, this is amazing, this is great, because their model of education is different to ours. So their model of education means that they don't have the same first year as we do for our higher education. They can pick and choose lots of different modules, and lots of them were very common. So there was a big drive where everyone was saying, right, everyone can do a calculus MOOC. It's always going to be the same, and it can save us money. And that got a lot of people scared in America. But of course, we're not quite the same over here, so it's not the same deal for us. But people's jobs did stay, and you know, I did a sentiment analysis just recently to have a look and see what people are now saying about MOOCs again. And you'll see it now. This is through a particular app that does sentiment analysis, and each one of these circles represents a selection of tweets. And the darker the tweet, the green tweets, the darker the tweets, you can see is the amount of chat about that particular thing, and the lower down is the more negative. So you can see, although it's not desperately unhappy, you can see that the hype has slowed down rather a lot now, and I think people are really thinking, okay, so we've done this for a couple of years, we've got Futurelearn, we've got all these different platforms, we've had a go, what's the difference? And where's the money? So what's going to happen? So the scary thing never really took off. People are a bit more wise to what could happen. My thoughts really about this are that there was so much expected of MOOCs that it had to die down eventually. But what is good about this, that we've got people that are looking at ways in which you can do things better through online learning, and that's a good thing about this. Dave Cormier and Jim Grimm are two people that are worth investigating. If you don't know them already, they are the ones that, well, Dave Cormier was from Canada, and he was recently at BET, actually, talking about how the MOOCs thing started, and he was the one that coined the phrase with George Siemens. So I think really, yes, have a look at Dave Cormier and talk about the CMOOC. He said at the BET it hasn't really gone the way that he thought it would go, and XMOOCs really are not the best model, and probably CMOOCs aren't either. So an XMOOC is what we're all seeing now, which is as a platform, and a CMOOC is where you have much more free-for-all, much more engaged learners. So yeah, one thing I was going to ask too, in the notes again, is what do you think has changed for your institution, if you're doing MOOCs at your institution, or even if you're not doing MOOCs at your institution or your organisation, what are people saying about MOOCs that have changed now, changed the way that you do things? Has there been any change? That's something that I'm particularly interested in. Another thing that I was looking at as part of the research that we were doing with MOOC SIG was Sean Bain and Jen Ross from Edinburgh. They've done lots of really good research, and they've done MOOCs, and they've all the time. The MOOCs we call like the biggest research experiment in the world, because everyone that's doing a MOOC normally looks at the data and says, oh, what's happening, what's going on. So this is part of the timeline that Sean Bain and Jen Ross created, which really looked at what was happening around 2012, 2014. It goes up to that area. And now you probably couldn't do a timeline that you could read because there'd be so many MOOCs all the time. But Sean and Jen have done quite a lot. But some of these courses now, when you look at the MOOCs, aren't necessarily what we'd call a MOOC. What my question really is, if you're doing an online course, what's the difference between that and a MOOC if there isn't the massive? So now the massive is the bit I don't think we tend to look at anymore. We're not really focusing so much on the hundreds of thousands, which is what the talk was originally from Udacity and in Coursera MOOCs. When the Python MOOC came out, there was 160,000 learners on there. Now, we all know about the attrition rates. We all know that people drop out a lot, but that's still a lot of people to find out about that particular course. But we don't necessarily have that anymore. So what I think I keep hearing is that people are creating online courses that are open to anyone. And I don't know if PebblePad have experienced this too. How many people are actually on those, not actually just signing up, but how many people end up doing those? So we need to be thinking a little bit more carefully about whether or not we're actually fussed about the massive part anymore, because I think we should be. I think that it should be more about the massive, because that's the difference. The more people that can engage in and talk about a topic, the richness of the data and the richness of the experience for people, I think it's much more interesting. And I wondered what other platforms that we have, you know, now for delivering MOOCs. So we've got things that we may not necessarily be familiar with. So there are things, obviously, like Canvas is now the second largest provider of MOOCs, apparently. You've got PebblePad, that's great. We have Futurelearn, Udacity, Coursera, all the regular ones that we've seen, edX in the press and on the web. But there are other platforms that can deliver MOOCs for anyone. You don't have to be chosen to be on that particular platform. So there's Udemy as well, and iVersity too. So there's lots and lots of different things that can be used to deliver a massive course. The problem is, if you do have them massive, does that crash the system? Which was always the argument before. Always the argument was if we don't have a specific platform, it could crash the tools that we're asked to use. And actually some of the academics that were using Google Docs originally, back in Georgia Tech used one famously, but and it crashed because 10,000 people all went in at the same time. So we need to consider these things when we're choosing different platforms, I think. So research at the time, when we were looking at these MOOCs, there was lots of research, lots of papers came out, and 2013, 2014 was well, 2012 was the year of the MOOC. By 2013 we had different research that came out. So there was the Biz MOOC Literature Review, the maturing of the MOOC that came out almost the same time that Futurelearn was launched in 2013. Edinburgh gave a very good MOOC report about how they created their MOOCs and their experiences. That was very interesting. Cetus created a Beyond the MOOCs publication. That was interesting for us to see. It's talking about where do we go from here kind of thing. That was interesting. And the HEA have created the Pedagogy of the Massive, which was actually by Jen Ross and Sian Bain, again from Edinburgh. They were commissioned by the HEA to look at all aspects of MOOCs. But those 4 things were really influential and interesting for us in terms of quality and in terms of looking and seeing what's happened and learning from those experiences. So another question I have for all of you, apart from what effect, so what's changed for your institution, has there been any impact with the people that you work with in terms of students, or if you're in an organisation around the people that you've worked with? So have MOOCs had an impact on-campus students? That's what I'm really interested to find out too. That's another hot topic of universities are spending all this money and all this time with organisations like the British Museum and the Archive. They're creating expensive online courses that are good for them in terms of their reputation, but not necessarily good for the students that are on campus. But those things, these courses that we're doing, should be excellent for on-campus students, because there should be now much more engaging ways to learn that we'd never have thought of before because of those things. So it'll be interesting to hear from you in the chat again if any of your on-campus students have been impacted by these courses. So yeah, there's been some recent reports out that I wanted to bring your attention to that I think you might find interesting. There was an Open University report about innovating pedagogy, and that was written by Mike Sharples, who is part of the Futurelearn consortium, and they've been doing some research. They're saying there's also, have you heard of the Sloan Consortium? Sloan Consortium changed their name recently to the Babson Research Report, and they've been tracking online learning, so which is an interesting thing to look at. So online learning since 2002, and they had a section in their report just about MOOCs, and they were indicating that actually in the US, institutions are beginning to level out now. Only 9% of all the institutions in the US have actually got MOOCs. So there's quite a large proportion of universities with over 3,000 students that don't have MOOCs and have no intention of having them, which I think is a wasted opportunity personally, because I think that we could have done so much with this whilst the senior leadership teams are engaged and interested. That's our moment to really look and see what we can do and take those ideas and show how the students on campus are affected, but also how we can extend knowledge around the world as well. There's work from Southampton from my colleague Julie Wintrip, who looked at student engagement because she's part of the RAISE network. I don't know how many of you know about the RAISE network. It's the research into student engagement. And they've just produced a report looking at how engaged learners are in MOOCs. Now that's of interest to anyone that's interested in how our on-campus learners learn as well. But that's one of the key drivers for doing these things, is that people actually want to be part of them and want to join in. So that's important. So yes, the impact of MOOCs. What has the impact of MOOCs been on our learners, or actually on our institutions, anywhere that we're engaged in doing this? Well, personally, I think that it has been like the Trojan horse for online learning and to blended learning. And when we talk about blended learning at Southampton, lots of people say, oh, I don't want to do any of that. But when you talk about doing a MOOC, yeah, we'll do the MOOC. And it's like, yeah, these two things are very similar. We're doing work with you all online, but we can use some of that with our on-campus students too. So if we say that anything has changed, I think one of the things could be, and I'm very quickly trying to have a look in the comments that are whizzing up there, that I think one of the things that's changed is that, first of all, senior leadership knew about online learning, which they didn't before, or they thought it was less, they thought it was inferior. They didn't think it was worth bothering with because they were on campus. But we're in a global society. We have the technology now to engage cheaply and quickly with millions of people around the world. I don't think it should belong to elite institutions. I think institutions that don't have that kind of funding or that reputation can earn a reputation through doing online activities. So I think we have some excellent educators in the UK, and I think that's something that we should work with other institutions together on promoting UK higher education. But one of the things I was interested in is in Coursera MOOCs, they can do online quizzes with interaction. So on a Coursera MOOC on the campuses in the US, students are able to do quizzes, and in those quizzes, in the video, they can answer questions and the data goes back and they can see what people are getting right and what people are getting wrong. Now in Southampton, that hasn't crossed over into our on-campus provision, but there's no reason why that can't, because what MOOCs have done is they've opened the doors to people that are quite startup companies. So entrepreneurs are now creating little startups where they're looking at things that are happening in those MOOCs that are of interest, and they're creating their own versions. So has anybody heard of a tool called Happy Yak? It's H-A-P-Y-A-K. That tool allows you to create interactive videos. So you can create a video now and you can have quizzes inside of it, and that tool sends the data to a spreadsheet, either anonymously, group-wise, however you want to do it. But it means that you can use it for education. And it's free to trial, but I do think you need to spend some money to buy the license. And there are other tools that are doing a similar kind of thing. So there's another tool called Caption, and there's another tool, Edpuzzle. All of these things have been inspired by things that are happening online, so whether it's through a MOOC or whatever, but online. And the more people that hear about these things through online activity, the more little companies with people with bright ideas will start creating things that we need. So I find those things really useful. Caption spelt with a K, by the way, John, just so you know. But it's just, I was just looking for things and ideas that are different than what we do regularly. I don't think a MOOC should be a video, a quiz and a discussion. Not when you have the world at your fingertips. I think it's about embracing what we have, and it's probably going to be the combination of the two things. The MOOCs via a platform, which is a nice structured environment, but also MOOCs via the web, where other people are writing blogs all the time, and people are exploring and finding new things. Bringing the two things together it would be a marvellous MOOC. This slide really is just from edX. It's a report edX created in February this year, where they're talking about the impacts that MOOCs have had on higher education for them. So I agree with most of these. I think I'm still not sure about taking the stigma out of online education. I went to China last year, and they still talked about MOOCs as an inferior tool, even though they were interested in them, but they didn't see them as the equivalent of an on-campus provider course. But I think the future is here for blended learning. I think blended learning now, if we take what we do in MOOCs and we've taken what we already know about online learning and you have the technology in between. We just heard from Eddie about badges. I love badges. I love the way that you can structure things around badges, but it's getting the people that don't understand about technology to understand how these things can be actually beneficial, and that could be a fear factor. So although that it has taken the stigma of online education, there is here provided another option for skills training. I think that we need to get our professional services staff trained, not trained like dogs, I mean trained, like inspire them to explore how they could use online technology to make themselves more efficient. And then they'll have a better understanding when we're talking about educational technology of the kinds of things that we could do, because it's a different world to them, but if they become part of our world by using these tools to be more efficient, they can see the benefits, and then we'll have probably more engagement. Okay, yeah, quality assurance. I really wanted to talk about this because I've noticed last year or so, quality assurance has raised the bar here for the UK higher education. So we have the Quality Assurance Association. They're interested in developing a MOOC about quality assurance in MOOC because although they're not particularly interested in MOOCs, they are interested in saving the reputation or maintaining the reputation of higher education in the UK, and I think that's a good thing. I don't necessarily think they need to go through the same structures that they do with our reviewing our processes with MOOCs as they do as our on-campus learning, but I do think that there is a place for seeing quality assurance not as a tick box exercise but as an enhancement tool. So when we're asking academics or we're asking people to think about the structure of the MOOC, so when we talked earlier about who's been developing a MOOC, well, I've developed MOOCs. I've written out the structure, but I've based it upon the processes that we have within our institution for two reasons. One, because it's a nice structure, and two, because if we do use that MOOC within our actually on-campus provision, then we have a very small amount of change to make in order to make sure that it's of the highest quality that we deliver on campus. So I think that maintaining quality assurance is important, and I know that in LinkedIn there's a group for quality assurance from the QAA. If anyone's interested in having their opinions heard about how quality assurance should be dealt with online courses, especially for the UK, then I think that would be a good place to start, because they're very keen and interested, and I think the working group's going to have a meeting in April. So get in now, because I think it has a place. It has a place for us, because one of our strengths in the UK is that we do have high quality online learning, and we do have high quality courses. So I think it's important to maintain those with what we're doing with our education. One of the other questions I had was, do you think that quality assurance should fall to be the responsibility of the platform provider if you use one, or do you think it should be the responsibility of the institution? So I think that's probably quite an interesting dilemma, because people tend to just go off on a tangent and get all excited because they want to do a course on something amazing that they love, but they really should sit back and just think about, okay, we want to ensure, even though they're not our students, but they are learners that are we're having an impact on, and some of these learners are in communities where they don't have the education facilities that we have, so it's important to look at that. Right, so let's look at what my next slide is. Yeah, I really do think we need to embrace ideas about MOOCs. I think that if we just left things as they are and just walked away from MOOCs, it would be incredibly disappointing. But I know that we have people that are passionate about education and passionate about technology, and I know that people would just take it up themselves and start doing things with little groups. Just like Jonathan Worth in Coventry did before we had the platforms. He created a course that he made open, so everyone could just do it, and he had hundreds of thousands of people doing it. So that's important. And then of course Coventry were like, yeah, I think we should do this, because he tried it out first. But I think that's the beauty of institutions. I think that's the beauty of higher education, that we have academics that are here to inspire and to be passionate about their knowledge and understanding of the world. And if we can spread those messages as far as possible and get engagement from people that do not go to our on-campuses, but that could enlighten the students that are here too. So we're not a closed bubble like we used to be. We're opening this up for the world. So I think that's really, really important. One thing I also wanted to say was, although we've been doing research with Alt-MOOC SIG, it's not just been Futurelearn. So Futurelearn is important and interesting and great, and has got people together that we wouldn't have got before, and has allowed us in our institutions to talk about doing things online. Even if people talk about doing MOOCs when they mean an online course, they're still engaged. But it's not just Futurelearn. There are all the other places that you can do yourselves. So I think that goes back to the quality assurance point, that if you do decide to do something, please make it, if you're doing it in the name of the United Kingdom of any level, it's still about your reputation, even as yourselves or your institutions, and it is your reputation in terms of sharing knowledge with others to demonstrate how well to do things. And I think it's really important that we don't just worry about one platform, and that we engage with the web. So we have got the technology platform. The platform here is, tends to be Futurelearn or wherever, or PebblePad. The web is your platform. Think of it from that scope, but ensuring quality is important. Yes, what can you learn from MOOCs? What happens when you do a MOOC? And I think there's lots to be learned from MOOCs. I think we need to take as much as we can and try and bring it into on-campus students, because otherwise we're not going to be doing MOOCs for much longer. I think there's going to be a few more short years where academics are going to be asked to justify the costs of doing certain projects, and a project will be a MOOC. And if a MOOC does not make any difference, no change, we're not changing anything, and students don't like them, I can't see the reasons for doing them for much longer. It needs to show something is happening, and I think it's up to us to ensure that we do. I think it's up to people like, or you guys that are doing PebblePad things, to not be get lost in that. I think research should come out from what you're doing to show the differences between what you're doing and what happens in Futurelearn and what happens in Coursera, because I think that there's value in being able to come together and use a platform, whatever it is, to create a course together. And I think that as long as you are sharing the knowledge through the research, I think that that will enrich our environment for learning. Okay. One other thing, very important, is, are you MOOC ready? And when I mean that, it means if you're introducing a course like a MOOC, or even an online course, it needs to have support in terms of letting people understand the digital literacy aspect, which is another area of mine that I'm very passionate about. So letting people engage as well as they may possibly, in terms of allowing them to have the support to develop the skills to know how to enter into a discussion and to be aware of the implications of writing something online. Helping them understand the platform in which they're engaging in. If you're going to get them to do a MOOC that is not part of a platform, but it's just using the web, and that's a much harder thing to do than if you're giving them something with some scaffolding. But at all levels, across all institutions, I think there does need to be some kind of support for the learners, not the students necessarily, but that knowledge again can inform our on-campus students. So yeah, I think that's important. Okay. And I really do think that it should be something that everyone should jump in and have a go. I don't think people could just look at what other people have done and said, yeah, we're not going to do that. I think you don't know where you can go from this. You don't know how many people are interested in the same things that you're interested in. So I think it's really important that you share the knowledge or your passion online and develop new ideas and come together, because unless you allow other people into your world, they're never going to know what you know, and you won't be able to share it. But I think there was a guy in America who did a course, he called it his 1-year BA, and he did it for nothing. and he showed other Americans that are spending huge amounts of money on their higher education that they could do a free year. And then obviously that leaves us with questions of accredited prior learning, and that's where it goes back to the quality assurance, but those are a whole new bunch of questions. But the point is that all this knowledge is out there, and I think it's time for us just to engage with it, and I think that the world will be a better place for it. So where do we go from here? It's a difficult place to know where we're going to go. It just depends on funding. I think it depends on our students and our learners and the feedback we get from those. So that's why I think research is really, really important. I think it's important to join up all the dots. I think it's important that we do this kind of thing where we share our knowledge together. I think things like the prostate cancer MOOC is an overwhelmingly amazing idea because so many people are affected by that. Those kind of things. I did a talk last week or 2 weeks ago now to our local residents association, and I think I was probably one of the youngest in the room, and I'm not that young, but that's fine. But they were fascinated because they didn't know, and we expect people to know about MOOCs because we know, but because we're in higher education or we're in the education sector or training sector, we know about these things. The lady that I was talking to, one of the ladies there has dementia, and she's just in the early stages, but so she's become a dementia friend. And we were talking about, well, maybe there should be a dementia MOOC. Probably is already one already. But if you could do things like that, inspire your local communities to get engaged, that's where knowledge and understanding really driving home the fact that that's why education is important. So that's one of the main things I think that we could do is sharing our knowledge and engaging with communities. So I think I'm going to leave it there. I'm sorry I was whizzing on, but I feel quite passionate about being open and honest and sharing information and gathering communities together to learn. I think it's really, really important. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them now. I don't know what I've missed here because I was rambling, but if there are any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Fiona.
Okay.
Hope you can hear me. Thank you very much. Yes, you can hear me. Yeah. I think there've been lots of questions sort of flying in, and but you've been addressing them so quickly, I think, as we've been going through.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any quick questions to ask right now? Can I just lead with one whilst we're thinking of things, and just how do we actually sort of, as institutions, identify suitable MOOCs? Because we sort of talk a lot about business models, but it's very hard to get something through, isn't it?
Yeah.
That can be viable, that can have a real meaningful impression on people who are not our paid-for learners. How is Southampton approaching that?
Well, they've approached it through very much, they've been led by Futurelearn, but there are lots of academics at Southampton that want to do MOOCs that aren't with Futurelearn, and we're not tied to Futurelearn. We can use Futurelearn, but I think in all the agreements with Futurelearn, you're not just tied to that one platform. But of course, all the focus on the resource has been on that platform. But other academics have, what happened was we put out a tender kind of process where we said, right, we are now with Futurelearn, this is what we're going to be doing. If you could submit your ideas for a MOOC, what would it look like, kind of thing. And then they were read by, we have a MOOC panel who read the like a steering group, but that's for Futurelearn. And so what happened was lots of people had their ideas rejected because we could only do 3 at the beginning. And so the biggest things were done. So we had web science and oceanography, and then we had the archaeology, the Portus one. But things have gone on from them. But those people that were interested, we've taken them and we've shown them other ways of doing things. So that's why the quality assurance is important, because it's not just about the level of quality of what you're delivering. It's about copyright, and it's about resourcing, and it's about what you do with the data and that kind of thing. So there are lots of conversations that are had, and we're just trying to make it more available to everybody. So we might choose to use Canvas, for example, to produce something, or we might use PebblePad if we were PebblePad, whatever. We're not constrained by one platform. But I think that the key driver is the passion and the commitment from the academic, because it's academic led. It shouldn't be led by the learning technologist. It should be led by the academic, and I think it should be something that they do that they can use with their on-campus students. Because if they do the two things, then they're getting the two different communities. You've got your students that are on campus, but you're also getting the views and opinions of people from around the world that they may not have thought of, and it will give them ideas too. So, yeah, there's guidance, but there's no strict no, you can't do something. So.
Very good points. David, do you have anything you'd like to contribute as well about how Sheffield Hallam are organising MOOCs, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, clearly we've only done the one up to now. There is a second one in gestation, which we'll be publicising very shortly, hopefully. But I think for me, one of the massive opportunities is to use a MOOC to help raise awareness about areas of provision that you find difficult to market. I mean, particularly in health, we have a number of courses which we know are quality courses and they evaluate really well, but they're really difficult to market because they straddle all of the sectors in terms of where the recruits come from. So to actually market that and get the message out there is difficult. So I think it's a good way of doing that. But I also think one of the problems universities have in terms of marketing is around marketing intelligence. And I think to an extent, you know, that term ought to be binned under the Trades Descriptions Act sometimes, but I think if you're looking at developing a new module or a new course, I think running a MOOC is a good way of test driving whether there's a desire or an appetite out there for it, and clearly then you've got a community that you can follow up with when you do start to offer the provision, that kind of thing. I think there are a couple of big opportunities there.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, part of my sort of desire when I was at Birmingham University developing for Futurelearn was that there was I take your point, I think there's a balancing act, Fiona, in terms of kind of getting those with real enthusiasm. You need those with enthusiasm, but at the same time there was lots of places where actually MOOCs could have been developed and actually helped to improve provision a lot better. You know, as David was sort of saying about trying to sort of pick off some of these courses which are struggling, and it is a hard one, isn't it? I mean, we did lots of soul searching, trying to find the right course, and in the end, it was those who shouted loudest in a way who kind of came forward and had a strong sort of offering, you know, in a sort of public market. Yeah, it's tough though.
It is a tough thing, and I think it's quite a learning curve for the academics too. I don't think they quite realise what's involved, because lots of them inherit courses or modules. Not many of them create new ones from scratch. So it's helping to develop their skills, but it takes a long time and it's quite labour intensive as well.
It is, and I think that's where hopefully that's where the, you know, academics who've gone through this and learning technologists as well can start to assist people. But I made the comment actually earlier. I actually thought that the contributions from Futurelearn was excellent, and just having them as sort of an independent sort of auditor or kind of QA person who can just help you with designs, help you with just structures, and just guide you through things, just making sure that it's going to be good enough, at least good enough when it is published. And I think, like I said, I think it sharpened what the university was doing as well, because they started to look at their QA for this kind of course and changed really, I think, the way that they approached it.
Yeah, I know, they were good, especially right at the beginning when everybody was very uncertain about what's happening, what it's going to be like, and so it's really useful. So it is useful to have the structure and the scaffolding. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, is there any questions? So I'm aware we've gone over 11 o'clock now, so any questions from our audience, if I can call them that? Okay, so we've got the point about the MOOCs. Okay, there's a point here from Lowell about should creators be students first. I think this is a good point about any learning.
Indeed, I think it's really helpful that, I mean, one of the things that pushed us down the route of the learning design we chose to utilise was my previous experience with a range of MOOCs on a range of platforms that I found totally unsatisfactory. I really didn't enjoy them, and that did actually drive my thinking in terms of ways in which they could be enhanced.
Yep, absolutely.
Exactly. When we had the meeting where we got everyone together about developing the first MOOCs, we asked them, right, how many of you have done a MOOC? Not one hand went up. And yet they had amazing ideas of what could happen and what would work. So we had done MOOCs and they hadn't. So we were able to advise in a much more informed way than if we just jumped in without just doing something online. It's not the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just also looking back over some of these points made. And Andrew, if you're still with us, I'm not sure if we may have left us actually. He makes a point about the diabetes and exercise MOOC being life-changing. David, is that something you're aware of or not? Was that running any different way?
Yeah. I mean, some of the examples of feedback that I gave you there obviously were demonstrating impact in terms of practice changing, and certainly in terms of Ghana, in terms of potentially putting in a pathway for the country, is quite significant. But we also had a number of patients and carers who engaged, and there were aspects that they fed back that they found really useful and interesting, and things that they'd not come across before, particularly in terms of aspects around end-of-life care and survivorship. So, you know, I'm certain there are a significant number of those.
Good. Fantastic. Okay, well, I think we probably ought to bring this to a close now. So let me, can I just thank our speakers, David and Fiona, who've done a fantastic job, and I've really enjoyed listening to everything that's been said. I kind of thought I knew everything about MOOCs, but clearly I don't. It's evolving so quickly that I think it's just useful just to have these opportunities just to catch up and just have a quick discussion about things sometimes. So yeah, thank you, Alison. So a little applause from Alison. If anybody else wants to write any comments, that's great. I've said earlier that we will be recording this. I have been recording this, so hopefully, all fingers crossed, we'll be able to compile it and release it onto the website, and I'll send an email around. Or Beth will send an email around everyone. I've also included a few links here on the page, so there's a few takeaway links referring to some of the things that's been talked about today, and I've also put in the corner here some dates of the diary, so some of the other webinars that we've got, and we've also got a health symposium coming up soon, Frameworks for Health, looking at all the different interprofessional approaches to learning, particularly using PebblePad. So thank you all, everyone, and good night. Yeah, good night, Alison. Thanks for joining us. So thank you very much, everyone, for contributing to this. I hope it's been useful to you all. Please do join us again in a month's time. So thank you very much. Bye, everyone.